Welcome back to the OpenAI Associate Developer course. In this lesson, we're going to discuss the response format configuration property for the OpenAI Image Generation API. Understanding this property is crucial for handling the data of the generated images effectively. The response format property determines the data representing the images returned by the API. This property is optional and defaults to URL, though you can set it to either URL or base64 JSON. Let's take a closer look at each of these options. URL. This option returns a URL pointing to the generated image. It's important to note that these URLs are temporary and only valid for 60 minutes after the image has been generated. B64 JSON. This option returns the image data as a base64 encoded JSON object. This format is useful if you need to handle or store the image data directly within your application without relying on a temporary URL. To understand the response format property better, let's jump back into our code. In our defs.ts, notice we've removed the user and end configurations along with the hashing function. This is because we won't be using these configuration properties here. Concentrating back on the response format property, we'll add a new union variable to hold the two possible strings for the response object, URL and B64 JSON. We will name the variable image response format and initialize it to URL. Know that URL is the default and is essentially what we've been implicitly using so far. We're initially setting this variable to URL so that all the existing code in main.ts can remain unchanged. This way, we're still able to use a URL to view and download our images just as before. For now, we're keeping the behavior the same by setting our response format to URL. Finally, back in our defs file, let's add the response format variable to our OpenAI configurations object. Once that's done, go ahead and compile and run your application. You should notice no change in behavior and should see a URL for your image just as before. Let's now take a look and see the difference when we set the response format to B64 JSON. To change from URL to B64 JSON, we'll only update our image response format variable in our defs file. We'll change this from URL to B64 JSON, and this is the only change necessary. However, once we make this change, we must make a few changes back in our main file's source code as well. In our main file, we'll need to update our code to alternatively check and log either the raw B64 JSON content or the URL itself. Currently, the code in our main file assumes there's a URL to log. However, since we've changed our response format from URL to B64 JSON, we need to check if the URL or base64 data is returned from the AI. All we're going to do here is a simple conditional check. You'll notice the image data has both a URL and B64 JSON property, and all we're doing is checking to see which one is set. Once you have the conditional code in place, compile and run your application again. Notice the different outputs you get based on your response object settings. In summary, the response format property allows you to specify the image's data format returned by the API. The format can be either base64 JSON or a URL used to download the image, with the default being URL. That's all for now. In the next lesson, we'll see how to write your generated images to our local file system when the response format is set to B64 JSON. Stay tuned, and let's continue enhancing our AI-powered applications together.